Hey guys, Carl Cooper here with On the Black, and I am joined tonight by Steve Adler of FriarHood.com, who covers the San Diego Padres. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I am fantastic. We got a lot of stuff going on out here. So and it was 80 degrees today, by the way, so no
Sweet.
complaints.
Yeah, I'm jealous. So we were dealing with 20 degree weather and ice storms here in New Jersey. But let's just get into it. Just so for the Mets fans out there and for my viewers, just tell us a little bit about yourself and FriarHood.com.
Well, my name is Steve Adler. I run sports websites. I run FriarHood.com, HighVoltage.com, which is a Chargers site, and I also run a very popular website on the East Coast. Of course, I run it out west, but we have a lot of traffic from the East Coast. It's a fantasy sports site called FantasyDaddy.com. I do radio spots throughout the country and some other internet streaming stuff. But for the most part, I'm just a big sports fan.
Cool. Well, the big news here this week is the Mets. Mets have agreed to terms with Chris Young, former Padres pitcher. Everything, of course, is pending his physical. And so just wanted to quickly just ask you some questions about Young. Not sure sort of what the reaction to the signing of it is to Padres fans or your reaction. You want to kind of talk about that for a minute?
Well, the reaction from Padres fans is more or less they're upset about it. And they're not upset about it from the standpoint that they're upset with Chris Young, but the casual fan is upset that he didn't come back. He's a very popular guy in San Diego, very well-spoken, Princeton grad, super nice guy. But realistically, he was a guy who couldn't stay on the field. And when you're talking about salaries, it's apples and oranges when you talk about big markets in San Diego. So by the Mets being able to spend $1 million or $2 million or $4 million, whatever it happens to end up with incentives, as opposed to what the Padres would have been offering, which would have essentially been $1 million to $1.5 million with no incentives, that $1 million to $1.5 million for the Padres is a big deal. If they miss on that $1 million, that's a big deal. Whereas big market teams, Oliver Perez, great example. You can still put a team together even if you have to throw away $5 or $10 million. But I'm not the biggest Chris Young fan, to be honest with you. So I might not be the best person to ask that, but I'll be honest with you. Chris Young was fantastic here for a couple of years. After the Albert Pujols incident, his night starts last year, he only had, I believe, 4 of them, but they looked fantastic. With $1 million or $2 million from the Mets, it's really a no-lose proposition for you guys. I like the signing for the Mets, and the fact that they play in Citi Field should also help him a ton.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. I talked a little bit about that on my blog, that I kind of like the signing for the Mets because for us, it is kind of a low-risk, high-reward type of deal. And Young being a fly ball pitcher, he could, take advantage of the dimensions at Citi Field, a fly ball pitcher. He could take advantage of the dimensions at Citi Field and really use that to his advantage, if he's healthy. I see him as, being effective that way. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it's funny because if you come to Petco, the place doesn't look huge. It's just a matter of the way that the ball flies. The ball just doesn't carry very well in Petco, which allows Chris Young to get away with things. But let's be honest, if you look at the numbers from the previous couple of years, you're going to sit there and say, well, it didn't really matter that he pitched in Petco. He was just getting hit. The guy was getting hit. Whether it was Petco or whether it was Dodger Stadium or whether it was Coors Field, he was getting hit. He needs to be able to keep the ball down, and being as large as he is, I believe he's 6'11", he uses his size to his advantage, but he doesn't get a lot of velocity. Guys with quick bats are able to turn it on him. The one thing that helped him a lot in San Diego was not only the fact that he was able to keep the ball down this year, but the team had exceptional outfielders. So they were able to go run and get those balls. Whereas in the previous couple of years, the outfield wasn't as strong defensively. And when we talk about, if you want to talk about Sandy Alderson and what he was putting on the field in San Diego, it didn't really work to the park. He was still having that old Oakland A's 3-run home run Earl Weaver type of philosophy. So depending on what you guys are able to put in the outfield, those guys have to go get fly balls. It's one thing to let the ball go out there. It's another thing to get under it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think I feel confident in, if our outfield is projected to be Bay, Beltran, and Pagan, I think all 3 of those guys, if healthy, could go out there and go after balls. The next question I have for you is just about the type of guy that Chris Young is. From covering the Padres, what have you heard about him in terms of the type of teammate he is and the type of guy he is in the clubhouse?
Well, I can tell you personally, Chris Young is super nice. The guy is very well spoken. He's a guy who's going to be a senator at some point. Everybody always likes him. He always says the right thing. He's the guy who you want to put on the front of the program. He is that kind of guy. As far as being a teammate, great leadership, great advice to guys. We've had a lot of young pitchers here over the last couple of years. They always point to him. Matt Latos, who was a big fan of what we do on the Friarhood side, and he comes on for interviews and whatnot. Matt Latos mentioned last year that Chris Young was a guy he could lean on and ask questions with and talk in the dugout. Great mentor, great clubhouse guy. And I know you guys have had some clubhouse issues the last year or so. So this will be an interesting dynamic, but Chris Young comes essentially, he's a lot more than just a guy who's going to show up at, whether it's 10 starts, 14 starts, or 30 starts. He's a guy who will be active with the pitchers in the locker room as well.
Good to hear. Now, I mean, obviously Young is coming off of some injuries the last couple of years. Looking back at his numbers, he seemed to have had his best productive years in 05 and 06. I think he made 30 starts both of those years. He won double-digit games in both of those years. In talking and covering Chris Young, do you think that he can eventually get back to that type of guy that a team can rely on to make 30 starts and to win double-digit games?
No.
Okay.
And when you talk about 30 starts, I'm just not sold on the fact that he's going to be able to start 30 games. And on how many games is Chris Young actually going to start? And my number was 14, and then he went down after the first game of the season, and everybody just kind of lost their minds. And it's just what it is. Unfortunately, the guy deals with a lot of injuries. He's got a lot of body going on, and he just tends to tweak things. So do I hope he does? Absolutely. If the guy is on, he's on. And if he's able to put the things together, he's a guy who can be your 1 or 2 starter for the Mets and compete. This is a guy who took no-hitters into the 8th and 9th innings on a somewhat regular basis a few years ago. And then the Albert Pujols situation happened, and the guy was just not the same. So, like I said, he pitched well last year. Do I think he can start 30 games? No. I think he can start 12 to 15. The one thing about Chris Young that's interesting is he works really hard. And what I mean by that is he's not a guy who's going to give you 7 or 8 innings. And that worked okay in San Diego because, for the most part, when he was putting up those double-digit wins, we had a fantastic bullpen. But when you're only working 5 innings and you're already up to 90 to 100 pitches, and you've got to bring in the middle relief guy, not the 7th inning guy, it's a whole different ballgame. And Chris Young is a guy who unfortunately does not go deep into games and will tax your bullpen. So in San Diego, that's okay. But there's not a lot of teams that have a strong enough bullpen that can afford a guy like a Chris Young, who's supposed to be a top of the rotation kind of guy, to be able to strain the bullpen like he does.
Interesting. Good to hear. Well, thanks, Steve, for taking some time tonight to answer some questions of mine. Guys out there, if interested in checking out the Padres, head over to friarhood.com and check Steve out. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much. Good luck this season, you guys.
Thanks.